The whole background of my first book, The New Evidence That Demands a Verdict, was to write a book against Christianity. I figured any fool could do that, and I qualified. And I left the university and traveled throughout the United States, England, the Middle East, gathering the evidence to write the book, and I had a problem. When I returned to the university, intellectually, I became convinced that the Bible was true and that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. I'd come to the exact opposite conclusion of what I set out to prove. And one of the areas that I really knew that if I could refute it, I had my case won. And I could look those Christian professors and students right in the eyes and put them down with a clear conscience. And that's when it came to the Bible. I really thought this was a book written years after the time of Christ, way into the 2nd century, and what people didn't like, they took out. What they did like, they added to it. Was I ever surprised? But in the book that just came out, I spent the last 4.5 years totally rewriting, updating with the evidence and everything, the old 2 volumes of Evidence That Demands a Verdict into the New Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And everything that I share is completely documented there. Now, in the evidence, whenever you examine any book of history, doesn't matter if it's the Bible, whatever, any book of antiquity, to determine if it's historically accurate, authentic, if it has integrity to it, if it's accurate, you apply an historiography. And a part of any good historiography, the principles in interpreting history, of studying history, in any good historiography is what's called the bibliographical test. And I remember one student spoke up and said, "Oh, I knew you'd bring the Bible in." I said, "I didn't say Bible. Bibliographical test." Now, a bibliographical test will ask 2 questions of the manuscripts of any work. Now, what is a manuscript? A manuscript, by definition, is a handwritten copy over against a printed copy. A handwritten copy over against a printed copy. And the first question they ask of a manuscript, now why do they ask these questions of a manuscript? Because here is 2 issues that I struggled with. Why I needed a historiography, why I needed to study the historical background of the scriptures. Because there were 2 questions that haunted me. And I think they haunt a lot of people. The first question was this: is what we have today called the Bible, and I'll look at only the New Testament today, is what we have in the New Testament what was written down 2,000 years ago? I think that's an honest question. Or has it been changed?
I wasn't there, but I know this, that enormous whales really should not be turning up in deserts. 75 different kinds of full-size whales were found fossilized in a mass graveyard of whale fossils in the Atacama Desert, the most arid desert in the world, in Chile. How do you imagine 75 whales that size might end up in the middle of a desert? And here's another whale dig site from the other side of the globe in the sands of Egypt. Look at the size of that whale buried in that desert there.
Now, one thing that I've learned over the years, the more I compare the scriptures with other literature of antiquity, the greater appreciation I have of the scriptures in comparison. For example, with Pliny the Younger, known as Plinius Secundus, from the time he wrote to the closest manuscript, everything else rotted away and lost, 750 years. With Caesar, wrote his Gallic Wars in the 1st century. From the time Caesar wrote to the closest manuscript, 1,000 years from the time he wrote. With Plato, from the time he wrote to the closest manuscript, 1,200 years. Aristotle wrote his Poetics around 343 BC. The closest manuscript is 1100 AD, 1,400 years later. Everything in between has been lost. Sophocles, 1,400 years. Euripides, 1,500 years. But when it comes to the New Testament, just the New Testament, we now go back within about 50 to 70 to 75 years. And now with some of the new discoveries, they're saying even taking it all the way back to the 50s and the early 60s, which would be within 20 to 35 years. You have the John Ryland papyri, a small portion found in a cave in Egypt that was preserved over all the years, about 125 AD, within 80 years. Then you have the Papyri Bodmer. Now, why is it called papyrus? It's written on papyrus. The Papyri Bodmer II, right around 155 AD. And then you have the Codex Sinaiticus, the Codex Vaticanus, Codex Alexandrinus. So they sound like diseases. Well, these are titles given to some complete copies of the New Testament. Just time-wise, there is more evidence in the manuscripts, time-wise, for the New Testament than any 10 pieces of classical literature combined. And then, with the second question, the first is the timeline. The second question is very critical, and that's this one. How many manuscripts do you have? So what do you mean? Well, the greater numbers, say this is the original and here's the copies. The greater number of the copies that you have, the easier it is to reconstruct the original, the Autographa, and check out any errors or discrepancies. Now, in comparing with secular literature, for example, Caesar and the Gallic Wars, 10 manuscripts. But nobody in the university questions that Caesar fought the Gallic Wars, and for a long time he was the only one that ever survived that wrote about it. 1,000 years, the closest manuscript after he died, and there's only 10 manuscripts. Of Plato, 7 manuscripts. Of Tacitus, the Roman historian. Right now there's less than 20 manuscripts that have ever survived. And then Thucydides, many people consider Thucydides one of the most accurate historians of antiquity. And yet there's only 7 manuscripts. And those are 1,300 years after Thucydides died. Herodotus is 8 manuscripts in about 1,400 years. With Pliny the Younger, there's about 7 manuscripts. With Sophocles, 193, which is one of the most. Euripides, 9. The men and women. Aristotle, there were 13. Now it's up to 49 they've discovered. Well, with the New Testament, just the New Testament, and the new evidence that demands a verdict, I have now been able to document 24,633 manuscripts of just the New Testament. I never even knew they existed until I set out to make a joke of it. And later, I found out the joke was on me. I had not done my homework. Now let me show you how unique that 24,633 is. Is there any of you here that know the number 2 book in manuscript authority in all of history? The New Testament's number 1. Any of you know the number 2 book in all history in manuscript authority? The Iliad by Homer. 643 manuscripts. That's number 2 in all history. And yet it's interesting, to this day, I've yet to find a teacher or a professor that knew that. I discovered that the early church fathers, when they would write letters to the churches, or they would give sermons, they would write out and copy quotes out of the scriptures. Well, just like I do. I will copy sometimes a half chapter out through my notes. And sometimes they would copy 3, 4, 5 chapters of the scriptures in corresponding with the churches. And I've now been able to document 86,429 quotations from just the early church fathers. And taking these 86,400 some quotations, you can, without any Bible's manuscript or anything, you can reconstruct all but 11 verses. But I never knew that until I set out to make a joke of it. And I found out later, boy, the joke was on me. That even to recreate much of the original, you don't even have to have a Bible or a transcript. And that is mind-blowing to me. And so, time-wise and number-wise, the Bible stands alone. No, it doesn't mean it's true, but I think it does mean this, that what we have today is what was written down. Whether what was written down was true or not, but it is what was written down. Now the second question. Was what was written down true? Did Jesus do that? Did he say this? Is this a true rendering of what Christ said and what he did?
And it's not just Zechariah that predicted the Messiah would enter Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. Daniel predicted the exact day and date nearly 600 years before Jesus rode that donkey through that front gate. Isaiah, who wrote the pages and prophecies seen on this recreation of a Dead Sea Scroll, lived in the 8th century BC, not only predicted the fall of the most powerful city in the world, Babylon, but predicted exactly how the city would fall and the name of the man who would do it, Cyrus. Then when Babylon fell, it was actually Daniel who walked out and handed King Cyrus a copy of Isaiah's scrolls written roughly 200 years beforehand, and went through and showed Cyrus his name in that scroll and exactly how the city was conquered, written by Isaiah roughly 200 years earlier, in fact detailing that the city would be taken by lowering the water and coming in. If you were King Cyrus, it'd give you a little bit of a shiver, wouldn't it? Isaiah would go on to prophesy in Isaiah 7:14 that the Messiah would be born of a virgin. Isaiah 9:6-7, that there would be a son called God. Isaiah 49:6, God's salvation would reach the ends of the earth. 35:4-6, the Messiah would perform many miracles. 41-5, he would be preceded by another prophet who would be a messenger. It'd be John the Baptist. 53:1-3, he'd be rejected. The Pharisees would not be happy campers about this. 53:4-6, he would die for the souls of all mankind. 53:12, he would be numbered amongst the transgressors. 53:9, that he would be buried in a rich man's tomb. This is the actual empty garden tomb where it's believed that Jesus was buried and then resurrected. How do you imagine these men could possibly know these things in advance? But it's not just Isaiah from the 8th century BC, or Micah who said verbatim that he would be born in Bethlehem, or Zechariah who prophesied to the penny how much Jesus would be sold out for 500 years in advance, that the Savior would be betrayed for exactly 30 shekels of silver. If I'm allowed to go outside biblical sources, then that number of 365 precise prophecies about Jesus Christ skyrockets. I can even go pre-flood on prophecies of Jesus Christ. Book of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, redundantly prophesied the coming of the Son of Man, the Lord of the sheep, the one for whom salvation would come, not only for the righteous before his coming, but all those afterwards, that through his name they shall be saved. Curiously enough, if I take the actual names in order from Adam all the way down to Noah, and then I look at the root meaning of those names in Genesis in order, this is what it reads. Man appointed mortal sorrow, the blessed God shall come down teaching. His death shall bring the despairing rest and comfort. Thousands would come to hear Jesus speak, and he's not recorded as being out there selling tickets. Not just healing some who came, but healing all who came. On many occasions, the masses wanted to make him king, but that's not what he's recorded as having come to do. In many, many ancient cultures of the world, kings would sacrifice their subjects to underworld gods, spare no expense to feed darkness other people's lives. Jesus Christ would be the complete reverse of this. Remember I mentioned the underworld gods. What greater love could one have than to lay down their life for their friends? The eyes of the blind opened. This is exactly what made men like the Pharisees behind the scenes unhappy. Under the cover of night in the Garden of Gethsemane, when the high priest and his soldier minions come in to get Jesus, and Peter jumps up with the other disciples and he cuts off the high priest's ear, and Jesus stops him and says, "The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?" Then, fascinatingly, the last miracle recorded by Jesus before that cross is to put back on the ear of his own enemy.
Peter is talking to the Jewish audience, and he said, "We do not follow cleverly devised tales." You know, it's interesting today how many people will say to me, and many of them are very sincere, they'll say, you know, back then they couldn't discern the difference between tales and truth. They couldn't discern the difference between fact and fiction. Well, let me tell you, I'll put any of them up against any professor today or any historian today. They knew the difference between truth and tales. They went out and died for it. And Peter starts out here and says, we did not follow cleverly devised tales. They knew the difference between tales and truth and fact and fiction, but we were eyewitnesses. We were eyewitnesses. They wrote as eyewitnesses.
After the ascension of Jesus, as the word began to spread further and further, the Pharisees came out with a fierce rage. 10 of the 12 disciples would ultimately be systematically hunted out, tortured, and crucified in horrible, torturous ways. The Pharisees told Peter, the very one who had stepped out of the boat and walked on water for merely a moment, that if he would deny Jesus, that they would let him live. Peter declined that offer, refusing to recant one single word. But he did make a humble request that, having stood on the same ground as his Savior, Jesus Christ, that he was unworthy to be crucified in the same way as his King. Thus, Peter would step out of this life on a cross upside down. John was actually thrown into a boiling vat of hot oil, survived it. Perhaps John's purpose wasn't finished yet, and ended up on the island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. This would only get worse. Religious rulers, combined with the might of empires, would relentlessly hunt out to persecute in a unified effort. Anyone who knew Jesus, had talked to Jesus, spoke to Jesus, walked with Jesus, knew anything about Jesus, fed them to lions for sport, hunted them out to hang, crucifixions as far as the eye could see to strike fear in any heart that would dare utter the name Jesus, to keep you from ever getting one jot or tittle of those texts. They failed. Those pages were paid for with buckets of blood.
Encyclopedia Britannica did an interesting study. They said, hey, if you were to go backwards in time from today's population, now our population growth rate today is 1.7%. They said, let's lower that down and only go back, have a population growth rate of 0.5% annually. If you go back in time at 0.5% annually, the result would be a handful of people 4,500 years ago. They say, on the other hand, if we were to go back 1,000,000 years ago, and 1,000,000 years ago is when the first ape stood upright and now declared himself human. Aha, the first human. And then made somebody else stand up, and he called him his wife and said, okay, you're going to be a human, I'm going to be a human, we're going to make humans. Okay, so they did that 1,000,000 years ago. And you were to have a population growth rate of 0.01%. A little bitty, insignificant number. That would mean at that rate it would be a doubling of the people every 7,000 years. So you start 1,000,000 years ago with 2 people. 7,000 years later, you've now got 4. 7,000 years after that, you've now got 8. 7,000 years after that, you get 16. If you were to do this for 1,000,000 years, an astonishing 142 doublings would take place. And there should be on planet Earth right now 10 to the 43rd power. That's the number 10 with 43 zeros behind it. That's how many people would be here in 1,000,000 years at that incredibly slow growth rate. No, we haven't been here for millions of years. The evidence is clear, only a few thousand years, okay? So the human population is a great way to show how long we've really been here.
Occasionally I'll hear commentators state that ancient India is tens and tens, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of years old. And I've tried to chase the rabbit trails on what they mean by that. It's not just India. You'll find this pulling dates out of thin blue sky, particularly in media stuff, a lot. I can't find what they're referencing. The Empire of India began following the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. You begin to see the rise of the first empire of India, the Mauryan dynasty. Going back even further into the Far East, the rise of the first dynasty of ancient China, the Jia dynasty, its inception at 2000 BC, bringing us full circle to our first empires, which would rise right down here in Mesopotamia, where Babylon would become, and the ancient city of ancient Uruk, where Gilgamesh ruled. Land of the Star, which is rested inside of the Crescent. Babylon and Egypt, the 2 opening players of occult empires right after the flood.
Welcome to Creation Minute. I'm Eric Hovind. The Grand Canyon. 277 miles long, 10 to 18 miles wide, and more than a mile deep. That's impressive. In the bottom is the Colorado River. You know, some scientists suggest the Colorado River formed the Grand Canyon over millions of years. But take a look at these facts to see it from a different perspective. The Colorado River enters the canyon 2,800 feet above sea level. It exits the canyon 1,800 feet above sea level. And the top of Grand Canyon is 7,000 feet above sea level. So you tell me, did the river flow uphill for millions of years to carve out the Grand Canyon?
If Gilgamesh meets one of the sons of Noah about right here, then that means that the flood can't be too far that direction. Commentators speculate, conjecture that the flood occurred at 10,000 BC, and my question would be this: how come from this point here I can find cultures rising up into at least 6 different empires right in here, but on this side from here all the way back 3,000 to 10,000 BC. That is 7,000 years. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, from the same range of mountains that the boat is said to have landed in the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, and then right over here, over to the Nile River in Egypt, little settlements begin to pop up at 3000 BC, is a flat line. But if I use the original Septuagint, translated from the Hebrew Torah to Persian Greek during the 3rd century BC under Ptolemy after Alexander the Great, or if you go with the original Hebrew Masoretic, you're going to come up with a flood date of 3000 BC. Maybe a touch more, but not much.
I grew up with Elvis Presley. I grew up and became a middle-aged man with Elvis Presley. And then all of a sudden, it's over. I knew the drugs had him, they were going to get him, and there was no turning back, and I felt sick.
Elvis sat down, and he said, "Sonny, get up, get up." So I was at the foot of the bed, and I got down on my knees. He said, "Come here." And he put his hands out. And I took his hands, and he said, look at me, man." And I started looking at him. He was trying to give me suggestion by concentrating on, "You got to kill him, Sonny. You got to do it, man. You got to do it. He's breaking up my family." Very low key. And I'm fighting. No, Elvis. He said, "Sonny, you can do it." Elvis jumped up, went in and got this assault rifle. I think it was AK-47 or something. And he came out, or either Thompson machine guns, one of the two, and he came out and put it in my hand. He said, "Sonny, go kill Mike Stone. Do it for me. Go kill him." He got mad. It was like a dark cloud enveloped everything, and everyone around was affected by it. He may not be angry at you. You may be angry at him, but his anger was so forceful that you couldn't wait for him to get out of it because it was bad.
He could push the buttons harder than anybody alive. I mean, he knew how to push the buttons, and when he pushed,
I was in the living room when she came in, and I said, "Elvis, this is Priscilla. Priscilla, this is Elvis." And I had these visions of all of us just going to prison for life. I was scared to death. She wasn't even 14 yet.
Elvis lived with young teenage Priscilla in fornication for nearly 5 years until he was pressured for the sake of his public image to marry her.
Let's face it, from the time Elvis became famous until the very end, he never at any point stopped seeing other women, including with Priscilla.
Exactly.
Never stopped.
He was having her around when he wanted her around, see.
You know the girl I was with last night? Oh man, I tell you. She could raise the dead, boy.
I was about 14 years old. And he sat down with me and he said, "David, Jesus Christ, I know who he is, but who am I?"
a fascinating thing with him, David, was the supernatural side. Elvis was very intrigued with supernatural,
It's like he had a presence, when I think of thunder and lightning and hailing, one of those huge storms. And Elvis says, "Man, I'm sick of this. We couldn't even see our hands in front of our faces." And he said, "I'll take care of it." So he rolls back to sunroof. The rain is coming in on us and everything. He took his hands and he went like this. And as God is my witness, the only reason I believe it is because I was there. He went like this, and it was like the whole thing split down the middle. Pouring down rain on one side, pouring down rain on the other side. It looked like the yellow brick road in the middle. Sunbeams on the road all the way down the middle.
Elvis's close friend Larry Geller even admits that Elvis named his gospel group Voice after his occult magazine, The New Age Voice. In his book, he shows how Elvis Presley was so influenced by the occultic masters from India that he was even going so far as having the stage costumes designed in the manner of the masters. He writes, in Elvis's mind, his life was being directed divinely by the brotherhood of masters and illuminated beings, enlightened entities that have existed since time immemorial. And he truly felt that he was chosen to be here now as a modern-day savior, a Christ. Elvis Presley was actually a disciple of the teachings of the Satanist Madame Blavatsky.
And deeply religious views of the occult such as those of Blavatsky, instrumental in the occult beliefs of Adolf Hitler himself.
She declared Satan, the serpent of Genesis, is the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind, and he who was the first to whisper, "Your stairway lies on the whispering wind." Forward it says, "And your stairway lies on the whispering wind." Backwards it says, "'Cause I live with Satan." Listen carefully. The demons lift up, because this isn't Led Zeppelin, this is Spiritism, and Spirit's working through Robert Plant. Backwards, they lift up the backwards path. Backwards, it says, "Here's to my sweet Satan." Did you hear that? Listen carefully. It says, "I want to live it backwards, like the Zep, whose power is Satan." Did you hear that? And it says, "He will give you 666. Bob Garcia of A&M Records stated, quote, "It must be the devil, because nobody here knows how to do it."
Well, I struggle with some of the lyrics from particular periods of time, and I don't know, the musicality and the construction of it is it's peerless. But maybe I didn't quite feel the same about the lyrics a little bit later on in life as I got a bit further down the road. Maybe I'm still trying to work out what I was talking about. Every other fucker is. I mean,
maybe you were channeling, Robert.
Channeling is a good one, yeah. Owen Glendower is, that's where it came from, yeah.
Maybe you were channeling, Robert.
That's where it came from, yeah.
"And the day you eat thereof, you shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil," can only be regarded in the light of a Savior. Elvis almost always had on hand a copy of Blavatsky's Voice of Silence, with which he would indoctrinate his fans by reading from Blavatsky's book on stage, as Larry Geller held it like a script prompter. One of his disciples declared, "But Elvis often gets up in his acts during his performances and reads these things to the audience," says Sonny. One night at the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas, he produced Blavatsky's voice and insisted that Don Rickles read passages from it. Satanism boils down to the lie that we can do our own thing and that we are our own gods and that we can save ourselves. Jesus Christ warned, "For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it." But as long as a man has the strength to dream, he can redeem his soul. That's why
you just blindly sell your soul, hypnotized every control. In a trance you go along, indoctrinated by the soul.
Blavatsky, Crowley, and Anton LaVey, former leader of the Church of Satan, teach the same lie. In the Satanic Bible, LaVey states, "Say unto thine own heart, I am my own Redeemer." Elvis declared, "Someday in the near future, we'll see how the so-called ministers of God react as they see their worn-out ways and the whole old age start crumbling. They'll all get theirs. I can't wait till the new age comes."
He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name.
And when massive foreign trade deals are made, they are done in U.S. dollars, which serves as the world's reserve currency. Now the UN is backing a plan to change all of that and create a new global currency.
Not only does Russia and China want this, but Japan wants a new financial system.
And those people who have been yelling, "Oh, the UN's going to take over global
Conspiracy
government,"
theorists.
they've been crazy, but now they're right.
Yeah, well, when
It's happening.
When Geithner said he would be open to the idea of a global currency last week, those conspiracy people had suggested that for years. You're not.
Bank of America closed. Citibank closed. Stop cheering. When you go to the store, you don't pay. There is no cashier. You just walk out.
Excuse me, sir. forgot your receipt.
Checkout lines. Who needs them?
Have a nice day.
This is the future of e-business.
Nowadays, you can just wave your card and you're on your way. It's the latest technology in millions of credit and debit cards, thanks to a tiny chip hidden inside. It's called RFID.
The year is 2017. You're rushed to a hospital unconscious with no ID or medical history, but thanks to a microchip under your skin, it's all there.
Is there, for example, a microchip, a watch, a tracking device we can use for our kids?
You got to do what you got to do to keep your kids safe. Civil libertarians, eat your hearts out.
Big Brother is watching. There's a nationwide push to start tracking where children are during school hours. They would basically be microchipped, kind of like a pet.
Now, a little extra security. Students in Elk Island Public Schools are swiping smart cards when they get on and off the bus. The buses themselves have GPS trackers.
Track you down in some toxic vortex, a cosmic battlefield. Retinal scan okay?
Ouch. What's that for?
DNA samples, new policy.
Training of generations. They're doing this with the junior high and middle school and elementary school kids. They're making them thumb scan to get their lunches. Training them for the cashless society.
We look at the numerology alphabet chart. Check this out. What do we see here lined up for 6?
Declaring there is no credible cause for concern about implanting these tiny microchips under your skin.
By 2017, everybody's going to have the healthcare chip. Listen to what I'm going to say. Why do you think the president exempted the unions till 2017?
Well, now there's a company out of Florida that's offering a free microchip implant for Alzheimer's patients.
Swiss scientists say they may have found a way to help people lose weight by implanting a computer chip into their arms.
Right now, I have an RFID chip surgically implanted in my left hand. It allows me to do all the same functions that the card does, but with my hand.
The club began injecting ID chips into its VIP guests 2 years ago. The right-size chips allow VIPs to skip the whole velvet rope routine, get into the swanky VIP areas, and charge drinks automatically. Sort of like starting a tab in your arm. This week, a U.S. company called CityWatcher.com adopted the same technology and implanted chips into a few employees, eliminating the need for company IDs or access cards.
An Ohio company has become the first American firm to implant silicon chips in employees to track their every move. Don't be surprised if your company asks to tag you in the years ahead.
He went on to urge his devotees to be open-minded in this era where brilliant new technological advancements are being made every day. The Bishop of Rome explained to those in attendance his excitement over making RFID implantation a mandatory procedure for all employees and residents of the Vatican.
But we need some system for permanently identifying safe people. Most of us are never going to blow anything up, and there's got to be something better than one of these photo IDs. A tattoo somewhere, maybe. The Saudis used an American device to scan the eyes of travelers. I wouldn't mind having something planted permanently in my arm.
The United Kingdom's Information Commissioner claims that in 2017, consumers will be cashless shoppers. A microchip holding personal bank account and credit card information will be implanted into the body, connecting to a database that will know who they are, where they live.
And he said, but anyway, it'll have information on it, and said you won't have to have a credit card, you won't have to have money. He said it's going to go to that. And this was 1996.
Électronique entrées voyeur. I believe that's French. This is a prototype bus for scanning or biometrics for entering into the bus and using the bus. So this is coming. This is happening very quick. Check out this other bus.
You know what I heard? I heard that they're putting the microchip in people next year.
Oh, the arm?
And that's what this is for.
Oh, the arm.
That's what I heard.
Sound more like a 666.
Implantable human chips. Supporters hail the technology as a medical marvel.
You have one in your arm right now.
That's correct.
Where is it?
It's in the upper right arm. It's a simple injection process.
If you have the chip, you can carry the records with you. They can stick it in the computer. They can know all your situations.
Technology on the cutting edge. We were interested today to hear that more than 100 law enforcement officials in Mexico are having microchips implanted in their arms.
These two workers have microchips?
Right. Well, this is very, very real, and these microchips are about the size of a grain of rice. They get injected into your skin.
Futuristic film. Humans injected with a tiny chip holding the key to all of their private information.
But as you're about to see in our CBS 46 investigation, it's not fiction. In fact, it's being marketed in Georgia as life-saving technology.
A Dutch man had 2 wireless computer chips implanted in his body. He did it so he could store digital money and use chips for other purposes like program an alarm clock.
Embeddables, like small sensors that are placed underneath your skin.
He says the chips can be used not only for digital currency, but as keys for your house or monitoring your health, even helping call a doctor if you have a heart attack. And he believes people who use the chips are helping to make them socially acceptable.
We are going to get to the Terminator scenario. That's what I see. Intelligent machines calling the shots. Humans, some subservient slaves is the best. Maybe on farms if we're lucky and so on. Looking at how we are ourselves now, I don't think the future is good. If you are a human after the singularity, forget it. There are certainly some humans that are against having implants, that are against becoming a cyborg and having extra abilities. It's difficult to see much of a positive future existence for them. Clearly, the world is going to be dominated either by intelligent machines or cyborgs, or a combination. That's where the future's going. And as a cyborg, if a human came to see me and it starts making silly noises, a bit like a cow does now. If a cow comes to me and says, moo, 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 I'm not going to say, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to do what you tell me. So it will be with a human. They'll come in and start making these silly noises that we call speech and human language and so on. And these trivial noises, I'm not going to do those silly things. Why should I? This creature's absolutely stupid in comparison to me.
As we merge with machines, and I think it's inevitable that we will transform into something new.
And as the technology becomes vastly superior to what we are, then the small proportion that's still human gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's just utterly There's more computing capacity in that grain of sand than our human brain by a factor of, I don't know, billions or so. So these machines, if we, humanity, if we decide to build them, we're building gods.
We are going to become one with God. Cloning and the reprogramming of DNA is the first serious step in becoming one with God.
We are going to become gods. Period. If you don't like it, get off. You don't have to contribute. You don't have to participate. But if you're going to interfere with me becoming God, you're going to have big trouble.
And now we have supercomputers that can actually read these thoughts and control computers by thinking. So by thinking, we can now control mechanical arms, mechanical legs.
James Barrett is the author of a new book, Our Final Invention, Artificial Intelligence and the End of the Human Era. Gary Marcus is a cognitive scientist at New York University.
You have one camp that says this is going to destroy us, and the other camp that says this is only going to help us. Where do you stand in all of this?
I wrote a book called Our Final Invention about some of the dangers that can happen on the development trail to creating human-level intelligence. There's short-term dangers and there's long-term dangers. Right now we've got a debate going on about creating autonomous drones that commit assassinations without humans in the loop. There'll be a debate coming up about autonomous battlefield robots. The same thing, autonomous machines without humans in the loop.
Can they evolve beyond our ability to control them or, in fact, understand them?
Absolutely.
They can.
They can. Right now we're creating machines that are extremely good at chess, that are extremely good at Jeopardy, that do things like navigation, theorem proving, a bunch of tasks that used to be ours alone. Someday in the not too distant future, we'll create machines that are good at artificial intelligence research and development. After that, their capabilities will accelerate dramatically.
So this is the game of Breakout, and in this game we're controlling the bat and the ball, and you have to break through this rainbow colored brick wall. So you can see here, after 30 minutes of gameplay, the system doesn't really know how to play the game yet, but it's starting to get the hang of it, that it's supposed to move the bat towards the ball. So now after an hour in, it's a lot better, but it's still not perfect. And then if we leave it playing for another hour, now it can play the game better than any human, and it almost never misses the ball, even when it's coming back at very fast angles. So we thought, this is pretty cool, but what would happen if we just left the machine playing the game for another couple of hours? And much to our surprise, what happened was that the machine discovered for itself that optimal strategy was to dig a tunnel around the side of the wall and send the ball around the back, which is something even the programmers and research scientists working on this project didn't know how to do. We only told it to get the highest score it could. Right. So we didn't even tell it it's got to do a barrier. You can imagine this in computer form. Yeah. It's just 30,000 numbers. It doesn't even know it's controlling the bat and the ball. It's just another collection of numbers.
Mind uploading powered exoskeletons will be just a part of life. And transhumanism will seem just as natural as evolution. And anyone who doesn't follow suit will seem thoroughly inhuman.
The album cover, which is me as half female, half motorcycle, it's about the fusion of skin and metal, the fusion of reality and fantasy, the fusion of the real woman with the magic that's inside of me, and in my metaphor saying the real you and the magic that's inside of you. So the fans are what keeps that alive in me, but what Born This Way is now isn't it our attempt as a community to tell the world magic is not artificial, it's real.
It really looks.
Sorry, David, seriously. This isn't a trick. You're just sticking a needle through your arm. How the are you... Wait, what do you mean, how are you doing it? You've stuck a needle through your arm.
It looks pretty real, right?
Sorry, I don't understand. How is that not real? What do you mean it looks pretty real? This is all glue. This is real. Sorry, this is real. That's real. That's not a trick. Oh, for sake.
I see it. Oh, nothing. Just a hole. No blood. Nothing. Just a hole.
There's not even any blood on this thing either.
Nothing. Explain that one, Dr. Rubin.
But the spirits with the capacity to be able to operate without people feeling any pain and things. And also without no problem with the blood, because as he would cut his incision, because the incisions everything open with no blood running. So he could do the work that has not been done before.
Is this part of the show, this sort of moody persona and the stare and the eyes and all that sort of thing? That's just you. The eye in the hand. And what is that? What is the eye in the hand? Let's see that again.
Protection.
Protection. What does that mean?
Protection from death.
Oh.
In Deuteronomy 18:10 through 11, it states, quote, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist." While many of the esoteric New Age and New World Order advocates continue to preach their solution to the world's problems, there is a true hope that is found in a message that comes explicitly from the true creator of this universe. The real spiritual and physical upgrade that the New Age spiritual evolutionists and transhumanists seek to attain has already been given to us in the gospel message of Jesus Christ.
The transhumanist movement, it really is a cover. It's a cover for the far more sinister event that's coming. And I think on the one hand, it provides the technology that makes these things happen. But it's also man saying, look, we can do it. We can truly pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We can take advantage of our own evolution. We don't have to wait. Because again, if it's predicated on we've evolved this far, why shouldn't we continue evolving? And if we have the technology to overcome death, to overcome disease, why wouldn't we, right? I mean, that sounds right. But I really think that we're getting into an area that we should not play with. Because we're now rearranging the Legos that God created. Right. And he's like, don't rearrange those. We're going into the source code. That's what we are. I mean, think about DNA. What is it? It's source code, right? God made the source code. Through sin, the source code got kind of scrambled and mixed up a bit. Through the incarnation, the cross, and the resurrection, God has promised to restore our source code to how it ought to be.